It's great to be here. I can't wait to talk more about this campaign, which is really good to.
Programming. My intention is to bring my experience as well.
I would have moments where I would just not be okay around people.
As a social worker, I have always wanted to impact people and help.
Some of our young people get trapped in that pipeline at 16.
Has a mental health disorder and or diagnosis, when he or she has an episode, like they're not even conscious.
Too, to see, okay, how are we taking care of these human bodies behind bars?
Let's invest in people and not prisons. Welcome back to the podcast. Tonight, we have the distinguished opportunity of having Hope from Freedom Agenda have a conversation with us about treatment, not jail. And before we get into that, I just let Hope tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, thank you for having me. But I'm Hope Sanders. I'm currently a member of Freedom Agenda. I'm directly impacted by the criminal justice system. I'm currently in grad school where I'm trying or attempting to achieve my master's of social work and advanced practice in programming. My intention is to bring my experience as well as, my academic knowledge to the forefront and help change the minds of a lot of the people that make the decision for us to see that treatment does not include incarceration. Incarceration has never been built for treatment. It's never treated anyone I've known. And I see that we have a good platform for that now. I currently, for my field work, I was placed in Oasis, which is a facility for substance misuse and mental health disorders. And I see people come in and out constantly. And I had to do something about it. I really had to do something about it. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So Hope, let's go back to this idea of prison or jails doesn't lend themselves to treatment. Can you just talk a little bit about that from your experiences?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, at 16, I was incarcerated in the 90s when it was the big war on crime, drugs, and it really appeared to be a war on, people of color, communities of color. And I got swept up in that whole thing, and I ended up spending 18 years in prisons, various prisons, women's prisons throughout northern New York. And 2 of those years, initially, I stayed on Rikers Island until, I went to trial and everything. And it was horrifying. I couldn't see it helping anyone. And then we have to look at the idea of what prisons were created for to begin with, right? They were never meant to rehabilitate. They were always created for punitive measures. No good was ever supposed to come out of it for you, but as we all know, those incarcerated, provide a service for everyone. So I never saw it. I never saw officers that were skilled in behavioral sciences, right? All you needed was a GED to go. And in criminal justice, they're not heavy on behavioral issues with criminal justice. They focused on policy. They focused on procedure. So that's where the disconnect would come when people had barriers to coping. They weren't understanding of trauma, family trauma. People just don't walk into prisons. There's a reason for that. There's a reason. Something happened. But their job was to just, keep and just uphold the rules and the policies of that particular institution. So it was the same environment as it was when you left, pretty much. And it's even more concentrated, I would have to say, because you can't walk away. So it was just as much violence I saw. Violence was pretty much the only language there was. There was no such thing, the social contracts are different. People react differently, and the officers would just watch. So I never saw it. I never saw anyone coming out of there feeling like they were really rehabilitated.
Okay, okay. So Hope, you said you were there at 16.
Yes.
Were you ever diagnosed with any type of substance use, or did you ever see a psychiatrist or therapist during your
Actually,
pre-trial or
uh,
after trial?
no, not at all. All I saw was, I believe, a probation officer. I was never given a screening or an assessment, if you ask me that. I was never assessed. I was never screened. I never saw a social worker. I only saw lawyers and probation officers. And the probation officer, of course, filled out the form and they scored you according to certain numbers and they gave it to the judge. And I guess your sentencing, was based off of that little card that someone that didn't know you, they never sat and asked, they just asked certain questions and that was it. You know, the only thing I remember being on the card was asking if you'd had ever used substances or something like that. But there was no follow up for that. I never, I told them, yeah, I smoked weed, and I drank like the rest of, people, my peers. And that was it. I never got a follow up for it. I never was required to see a psychiatrist. Even after doing 18 years, I was never offered a psychiatrist. It wasn't implemented as part of um, my release papers, even. But they'll say, you can't stay away from this, stay away from that, and this is your curfew. But they're not saying you have mandatory mental health services. Like, they didn't think of that. And it was actually a counseling HRA after I was supposed to go to the back to work program, but I told them I couldn't be there as regular because I had parole visits. And once I told them that, they asked me how much time I did. I'd let them know how much time. I'd done 18 years, and they sent me somewhere else. And the counselor there said, you know what? I want you to see a psychiatrist. She said, because you did too much time. You need to see a psychiatrist. And I was in transitional houses and everything, and none of that was implemented into. They didn't have counselors coming to the house, nor did they require we go see them. So I understand how support, how you really need support. It wasn't even mandated for people that was incarcerated. It wasn't. It really, really wasn't. Only if a person was in crisis would you see a psych. And if the psych felt that you needed to see them on this such and such a date, fine. But other than that, it wasn't mandated for everyone.
So basically, you did you was traumatized for 18 years and
Yeah.
then released back into the community without
Yes.
any type of treatment.
No. No treatment at all. No. And I didn't realize it until my brother passed. And I was responsible for taking care of his services. I'd never done this, ever. And so it was then that I said, I need a psychiatrist. I need a psychiatrist. And I went to the hospital, social worker. My aunt said, go to the hospital, social worker. And I went and saw the social worker, and the social worker connected me to a psychiatrist, and it helped me for the first time. I was getting the treatment that I needed, but I had to seek that out. And this was probably 15 years after I came home. I mean, 10 years, after 10 years of me coming home. And I went through several organizations, nonprofits, I went through the whole system. And nobody ever um, stated or mandated or even suggested that perhaps I needed to see a psych.
Is there a stigma or something attached with seeing a psych, you think?
Absolutely. I can't even sit here and lie. Um, Absolutely. Because of course in our communities we don't do that. We don't tell people our business. What happens in the home stays in the home. And so when you're talking about telling a complete stranger your business, people are like, what? And then oftentimes the psychiatrist doesn't look like them, right? It's not somebody that would be trustworthy in their lives. So I think that absolutely there's a stigma against therapy, but I try to remove or change that stigma. And I tell them there's nothing better than being able to just say everything you need to say to a person you won't hurt. a person who's not affected by what you say. So I try to lift that stigma, but it's definitely a big title attached to therapy.
Hope, talk to me a little bit about your support of treatment, not jail, from a public safety perspective.
Okay. That word public safety always gives me chills, because of course we want to stay safe, but we want everyone to be safe, and we want everyone to be safe from everything. So often people will say public safety, but it only applies to a certain amount of people, a certain group of people. And so when I see treatment, not jails, I see it as a way of giving a special protection to those that they forget when they talk about public safety. I think about the people who come through the facility I'm working at, and people that didn't deserve to be there, but because a judge or a lawyer or someone who has no clinical knowledge placed them there. I believe that there need to be more social workers, in the courts. It needs to be several assessments done throughout the stages of going through litigation. Um, I'm learning how to do mitigation now, and it's something that's needed. When we look at lawyers and judges making the decisions for putting people in prisons, in jails, that should have gotten treatment, it does a disservice for everyone. The women I was locked up with, so many of them. I can't remember a story I heard where I didn't see how the system failed them. Where I literally saw how somebody dropped the ball with them, and they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be here, but because they put so much emphasis on the act and not the reasons behind it, that's why they're able to get away with it. But I feel as though treatment, not jails would definitely help in this public safety issue that they're having. I think, in fact, it would allow for people to cope with issues that they have, be able to navigate through so many of the barriers they may face. If they don't know, then they're going to go back to what they know. And if they're not, if their mental health is not, if they're not well, then what do you expect for them to do? How do you expect for them to act? So I think that as from a clinician standpoint, I believe that work needs to be done with social workers. I believe in crisis response teams having clinicians respond first. I believe in that. I believe in gentle supervision. I believe that. I believe that public safety, again, I say, means protecting everyone from each other and even ourselves, right? So I believe wholeheartedly that social workers, clinicians, more of them need to be placed in the prisons, in the jails. They have far few of those and a whole lot more, officers, and that's a problem. That's a problem. So treatment, not jails, is everything for me. It says everything in a nutshell. And that would remove people that are not qualified or it's not in their area of expertise out of the equation. Out of the equation. I often tell when I speak to judges, I be like, y'all need to mind your business on this. We don't tell y'all what to sentence people to, right? We don't involve ourselves in the law. When you don't take what clinicians have to say at heart, not even so much the clinicians, but yes, the clinicians, because we come from a narrative perspective. We listen to the people that are vulnerable because they often know what they need. They know what they need. And it's our jobs to help them achieve that in the most healthy and holistic manner. And the judges and lawyers aren't really helping that.
Yes, Hope. I definitely agree with you because, you know, if you get a stomach virus, you wouldn't go to, you know, a police person and say,
Exactly.
you know, can you help? Why? Because that's not their field of expertise. And
Hmm.
by the same token, you know, you got a mental health issue, you wouldn't go to a court system and say I need help because that's not their
Exactly.
expertise. So
Exactly.
you know, I hear you loud and clear. And Hope, what would you tell someone, or what would you tell our viewers and our listeners? What message would you give them
Hmm.
that would encourage them to support treatment, not jail?
Um, what I always tell them, I let them know that these are vulnerable populations. These are people that have went through trauma, and with the right support, we all can do better because none of us can honestly say that we haven't faced some dilemmas, but we had support. Many of the men and women, they don't get that support, and now they're able to. And we need to understand that we need people around them that know, that are educated in how to cope with them. The courts and the prisons aren't doing much, as we can see on Rikers. You know, there's so many suicides um, going on Rikers that it's unconscionable to have people dying like that, and it's because they don't have people there that have the expertise. There's enough of trainings. Now we have to actually put people in those places to help. So I believe that treatment in our jails is the only way to do it because it's a comprehensive plan from point A to point B of how people with mental health disorders can be monitored. And if they can constantly be monitored throughout the whole criminal justice system. So that this way they can be assessed and placed and receive the correct support that they need. So, because I believe they feel like everybody, they just let them out. No, that's what they used to do. We're fighting so that this doesn't happen, so that they have the right support when they get out.
So Hope, you're basically, saying one of the things that I oftentimes say, which is, we take people that got a substance use disorder and a
Hmm.
mental health diagnosis, and we send them to prison,
Yes,
and we re-traumatize them again while in prison, and then we release them back into the community with additional trauma, and we expect them to do something different with no support throughout the entire system.
exactly. And we expect for them to do well at that. So it's all about changing people's minds because I have a wonderful time doing that. I'm in Colombia now, and I went there for a reason, because I felt like they needed me. They need to change the narrative. Um, I understand what the foundations of Colombia was built on, and in dismantling it, I put myself in that place, and I fight every day. It's not a day I don't discuss, treatment, not jails, freedom agenda, close Rikers, so many things I've enlightened them on because they don't know. They don't know. They really don't know. So it's definitely something that's very close to me. But right, you want people to be better off than they were when they went in. You don't want them to come out even worse. As you said, the trauma is horrifying. Your identity is stripped. You're isolated, sometimes violently. You're snatched away or separated from your families. And it's generational trauma because the children watch the parents get locked up or their main caregiver or even a family member. So it's hard. It's very, very hard. And it's all about rehabilitation, if that's what it's for, and restorative justice. The people that have committed acts under desperation, you want them to know other ways so they can give back. or secure employment, or do something, because a lot of them are capable, they're talented. There's so many things they can do, but they don't see it that way. But absolutely, I believe the treatment, not jails, is just that, treatment instead of jails, because jail is not treatment.
So, Hope, I want to go back to you. 16 years old. Basically,
Mhm.
you were a child,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I don't mean this insultively or disrespectfully, but you was just a little girl.
Yeah, I
A
was.
little girl.
Mhm.
And they sent you to prison for 18 years.
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
never treated you for your substance use. No one
No.
ever took into account that, there was a strong possibility you could have been under the influence during the
Right.
commission of the act.
Right.
No
And
one
at
ever asked.
16, smoking a 16-year-old smoking weed, it affects their brain differently than it would a 30-year-old, right? So, and my decision making and all of that is totally different at that age. Just the mere idea of me telling them that's what I was doing should have caused for them at least to a scream. But they didn't do that. No, they didn't. I got and yeah, I ended up doing all of that time, and mental health wasn't mandatory. Um,
And I don't know, was it mandatory? It wasn't even an option given to you, was it?
no, oh, that's never an option. Only if you're in crisis.
Just
You know, they,
define crisis for me, for our listeners.
that would mean like if you're in extreme distress, like if you're crying, hysterically, threatening self-harm, or wanting to harm someone else, or if you was just enraged physically, but they want to see it more in a physical manner. They wouldn't have just assume unless they actually saw you crying or throwing something, or one thing or another. And usually they only call mental health because they don't want to deal with you. They're not inquiring. They're not speaking to the mental health professional and say, well, okay, are they okay? They would just disappear for a day, or so, and come back to the unit. And sometimes it would happen over and over again.
So
I saw
basically,
suicide.
Hope, you were there suffering silently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Women I knew committed, suicide, and it was nothing, anyone could do. It was absolutely nothing you could do about it. They didn't send grief counseling. They would just let the chaplain would come to the unit, but it wasn't like it was more of just protocol. It was more just like protocol. But so that's why a lot of us, we had to take care of each other. We had to take care of each other, but we're broken, right? So it's like more on top of it. So we were never truly able to get the support that we needed because they didn't think it was needed, because they didn't see it was needed.
So, Hope, we want to thank you for being transparent, for sharing your story with us, for enlightening us on the silent suffering that goes on inside of prisons, the lack of treatment that goes on inside of prisons. And we definitely thank you for sharing with our listeners that judges and district attorneys are not mental health clinicians, and they
No.
don't have the ability to make a mental health decision. That can only come from a trained professional.
Yes.
So again, thank you,
Thank you.
Hope, and keep fighting.
I
Keep up the
will.
good work. Keep up the
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.